Sony has said that they are no longer going to produce discs, no longer going to have physical media for their games starting in 2028, which assumably means that they're going to release a PlayStation 6. It is not going to have a disc port, and they are just simply never going to make physical games again, unless the pushback for this is so insane that they have to do it. And I want to get a little bit existential and philosophical about this as somebody who owns a fairly decent number of Sony video games physically. As you can see, they have been sitting behind my desk underneath a shelf and obviously not been played for quite some time. Now, when I was a kid, my dream was basically just to own as many video games as humanly possible. I remember a time where I was fantasizing about becoming a millionaire and buying all of the games for all of the consoles, and this was before video games were being resold for preposterous amounts. And it's not like I wanted to have a complete collection. I wanted all these games for access. I had no way to play most of the games that had ever existed. My first console was a Nintendo 64 in the late 90s, and I had only ever heard about the Super Nintendo or the NES through reading Nintendo Power magazine as a kid and hearing about all these legendary games that I had no idea where to find. They were no longer being sold in stores, and I just didn't know how I was ever going to get my hands on them. But as early as 2003, a magical thing happened. I downloaded an emulator pack that came with ROMs for every Super Nintendo game I had ever heard of and then some, and I played a whole bunch of them, and I had a great time, and I felt like I understood gaming history a lot better than I did before. Now, I know plenty of people who collect old games specifically because they enjoy the experience of playing old games on their original hardware. They want to be able to put it in, have a nostalgic experience. Oftentimes, the games are designed with the expectation that they would be played this way, and so there is something a little bit more fulfilling about playing a game in its proper context, even if you're not really able to recreate the context it was intended for, which is the time it actually came out. At the very least, you feel a little bit closer to the history, and sometimes it's just straight up a more enjoyable experience of the game. Now, of course, there are other people, and I fall closer into this camp, who prefer to play everything on emulators because you can customize the experience and make it better for yourself. There are people who would prefer to play a ROM-hacked version of an old game that smooths out some of the wrinkles in it, because some of these games are just fun. It's not so much about getting close to the intended artistic experience or experiencing some kind of nostalgic throwback. It's just about getting to play a fun video game, and if you can make it even more fun, why not? Now, I don't think these are competing ideologies per se. I think a lot of the same people fall into both categories. A lot of people who collect classic games also run emulators, run mods, and enjoy both facets of gaming life. When it comes to the conversation about physical media, I think it's interesting when people say that they want to own it because they just enjoy the experience of it. Because you're like, I like having a tactile thing, I like having it on my shelf, I like pulling it out, putting it into the console, and watching it turn on, and I like the feeling of ownership that comes from it. But that last part, that's the one I want to dive in on to get a little bit more philosophical about this, because I do think a big part of why people like physical media is that they like feeling as though they own a thing. Like, I have this thing, it belongs to me, and it will continue to belong to me until I should sell it or get rid of it, give it away, whatever the case may be. I want to own this thing, and the ownership gives you a sense of perpetual access, especially knowing that if you buy something on a digital storefront like on the PlayStation, it can easily be unlisted. It can be taken away from you. Hundreds of, maybe even thousands of games have been lost this way, have been lost to the changes in the digital marketplace. Sometimes you can install it on one console and then you can't on the next. Sometimes it just straight up, the access is removed. And so people love having physical media because it represents a more perpetual state of access. But if you know a lot about physical media, you also know that it all degrades naturally, that none of these things will actually last forever. If you pass these things down to your children, these things at best are going to last a couple of generations, and they will require maintenance. There are ways to take care of things to preserve them better. You can create a better environment for them. You can have them refurbished every so often. But the average person who is collecting these video games does not have ideal conditions to take care of those video games. Even just something like having stacked them on top of each other the way I have here, the weight of gravity of pulling all of these games down onto one another could potentially warp some of the discs. Now, the way that they are placed in their containers is meant to prevent some of that. It's not as bad as vinyl, where there's really nothing suspending it or creating that tension diffusion that allows the discs to kind of hover and not have to be laid on directly. But nonetheless, these discs are likely to warp to some extent. They are likely to be damaged to some extent. If any of them gets left out, they will be scratched up. They're generally something that has to be taken care of, and the actual act of using it is probably the biggest wear that it's going to endure. And if you're trying to maintain your original consoles, for instance, you have to deal with the fact that consoles break down pretty easily and pretty quickly. I personally went through like 4 or 5 different PS2s. The PS3 had problems. The PS4, I'm sure, also has had problems. I haven't had any with mine in the time I've owned it, but I never put nearly as much load on it as I have some of my older consoles. And so you have to maintain access to your consoles to even be able to access these games in a way that you can play them. Generally, what I'm trying to say is it takes a lot of maintenance. It's not just about owning the thing and therefore you have access to it. You have to take care of it, much like owning a house, where yes, you own this thing, but every year there is going to be a storm that knocks some part of it off and you have to replace it, or else the thing is just going to be worse from that point forward. And so if you are going to own a huge game collection, that also means you need to be ready to perform maintenance on your game collection regularly. You also have to be able to afford storage for your game collection, because if, say, you should not be able to afford your house anymore and you have to downsize, and then you don't have room for as many games as you have, you now need to either find someone to hold on to them or find a storage space that's affordable enough to put them in, and then that also has to be a environment that's going to treat the stuff right. So basically what I'm trying to say is, if you really are taking it seriously that you need to have your game collection well preserved and accessible to you, that needs to be a major aspect of your life, is just the maintenance and caretaking of your video games. And I really don't think that a lot of the people who really obsess over physical media and wanting to have it as something that they own are actually prepared for the responsibility that comes with it over the long term. I don't think that everyone who has a big game collection is going to maintain the ability to house it and keep it well maintained. I think a lot of people are probably sitting on a pretty sizable trove of games that they don't really know that they work. That's kind of how I feel about these PS2 and PS4 games here. I'm sure there was some point where I checked all the cases to make sure the discs were still there, but I had a tendency to put discs in the wrong cases all throughout my upbringing. I know that some of those discs may have sat out once or twice. I know that a bunch of them have been left in weird environments, where sometimes they were left in a shed for a period of time. I don't know if the weather damaged them at all. I have not tried to play any of these games in at least 2 years, and some of them I've basically never played at all. Some of these maybe went in for an hour in whatever console I had. Some of them straight up, I don't think I've never played any of the Dragon Age games. I think I own all 3 of them on PS3, and I've never put them in. So some of these games, questionable if they ever even worked. Some of these games, I don't know where they came from. I don't even own a PS5, but I have a copy of Unpacking somehow. So suffice it to say, these games are not doing much by being owned by me. I'm not gaining a lot by having these, because even if I wanted to play one of these games, I would be more likely to simply download an emulator and play it on my computer than to try and fish out an old console and put one of these games into it, especially knowing that I'm literally degrading the quality of that disc, reducing its value, reducing its longevity every time I actually use it. And so I think that I would rather sell all of these games to somebody who is going to take care of them in a longevity sense, somebody who is dedicated to maintaining a collection of video games, but that person will also only need one copy of each game. Maybe they want to own more than one of certain games, but I don't think that the number of people who actually have well-maintained collections equals the number of game discs that are floating around at any given time. I think, in a sense, for someone like me, it is more responsible to simply have digital games than it would be to own physical games. Now, also, corollary, I would never buy a PS6. I don't own a PS5. I have no interest in owning a Sony console ever again. Why would I? I have so much access to video games through my PC for free. Not to mention I can buy games on Steam, which is pretty easy and convenient. I can just install Steam on any computer I come across and put all the games that I have through Steam onto that computer. Do I think there's some level of ephemerality behind the games on Steam? Like maybe one day Steam itself as a platform just dissolves and all my games are gone and all my hard drives die that had the backup files and now I don't have access to my games. Sure, all of that is possible. I think it's just as likely that my house floods or burns down and all my physical media is destroyed. I actually think that games existing in a cloud sense is better preservation than it is to individually have your physical games. Because, like I just said, if I had a Super Nintendo collection and then my house burned down, I would instantly lose access to all of my games physically. But I will always be able to access the entire Super Nintendo library through ROMs because someone's always going to host the files. And all it takes is one person providing them as an upload to the rest of the internet for everyone to instantly access these games. And I think there is a good shot that there will always be someone who has the files and is willing to share them. And it's a lot harder to share a physical copy. Like if I own Odin Sphere and I loan it to someone, I now can't play Odin Sphere while they have my copy of the game. If I have a digital file of Odin Sphere and I make a copy of it and give it to somebody, we can both play at the same time. So these games propagate way more easily through digital file sharing. I feel like it should be an obvious statement that ROMs have done more to preserve and share games than physical media was even remotely capable of, especially when we're talking about these older games that have had time to degrade. You know, I have owned an NES and games for it that I procured in my teens that barely worked or didn't or stopped working. You know, the console itself barely functioned. One of the games was scrambled. You know, like these things don't hold up that well, again, if you're not actively taking care of them. And so while I understand that there is a market for people who want to actually take care of their games, I think that is such a niche market compared to the majority that it doesn't necessarily make sense to try to cater to that market if you don't need to. Like, there was a necessity of games being physical up until the point where they could be digitized. And again, it does suck that the people who own these IPs and stuff are going to maybe potentially take these games away or make them difficult to access for you. But if your real concern is games preservation, you should just be pirating the games anyways, because that's the only way to really preserve them. Now, if you have a stance against piracy, I understand, but I don't appreciate it. I can't really wrap my head around feeling like you need to pay for media in particular. Not because I don't understand wanting it to be perpetuated through sale, but to me, those two things can be completely disconnected. You could literally download a game for free and then just like give money to the people who made it, and those don't have to be the same transaction. You don't have to pay the amount that is asked for the game to pay for the game. And really, in this modern economy of the superfan, you buying a game usually isn't contributing that much to its financial existence. Most games that really make money are dependent on whales, are dependent on there being somebody who is going to spend extra money on the game, who's going to buy in-game DLC and, you know, all the little items and gachas and all that kind of shit. The reason games keep trending towards formulas that allow for in-game purchase is that some people will just spend tremendously more money on the game than the average person. And eventually it comes to a point where the average buyer, from the developer's perspective, that person is just an advertising node more than they are actually a part of the profit margin. Like if you pay, let's say, $40 for Arc Raiders, that is a drop in the bucket of the money being made by Arc Raiders, because other players who also paid $40 to get in are going to spend hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on all the in-game cosmetics and extra stuff that's being offered to them. And so even though you did pay for the game, what you really amount to is the part of the world building for the people who are really paying the game. You are giving them something to be better than or to compare themselves to. You're fleshing out the environment of the game world, and you might even be talking about the game, promoting the game, you know, bringing it to attention of more people, but you are not the profit of the game. You are just there to keep the whales in a pond, to make them feel like they're not beached on dry land, but in fact swimming in the ocean. In that sense, you are the ocean. You cannot hold yourself personally responsible for the existence of something that you didn't necessarily ask for. And I guess it's different if you're somebody who actively is begging for a company to make something for you and you're offering an amount of money to them. You know, if you're literally making an offer, I think that would be different. But when something just comes into existence and you had nothing to do with it and you express your interest in it through, you know, paying for it just to have access, I think you should consider that you can just get access. You don't have to pay for the access. Sometimes you do. Some things are just not accessible without paying for them. But a lot of the time, you don't really need to pay for the access. And so you need to ask yourself, why am I actually spending money on this? Am I paying for it because I think I need to access it? Or am I paying for it out of some kind of warped sense of moral obligation, even though there is no ethical consumption under capitalism? Or am I trying to support its existence, in which case you can just give the money to the people who make it, and you can give whatever you're comfortable with, because ultimately you're probably a drop in the bucket of the money they're actually making. You also have to consider, who are you actually paying? Because for the most part, the game developers, they're paid by commission before you ever contribute money into the project, and you paying for a game doesn't guarantee anything about the future of that developer. We all know the stories. We all know about a game like Hi-Fi Rush that comes out and you look at it and you think, oh, a relatively inexpensive, indie-looking, you know, it looks indie because aesthetically it's so different and so unique, and it gives you an immediate sense of connection to the people who created it because you can see so much identity being poured into it. And so you pay for this game hoping that you are supporting its existence. And even though the game is successful, the studio gets shut down because the publishers, Microsoft, aren't looking at it the same way as you are. They're not looking at it as, this many fans paid for this thing and therefore it gets to continue to exist. They're slotting it into a bigger overarching plan for what they're trying to do with their company. And that doesn't mean create the best art that people want the most. It means follow a particular content strategy that we've devised at the top and manage our resources accordingly. And so to them, the developer is just a resource. Now, when you pay for an indie game, and it's literally just paying the developers, that's often very different. But if you really care about those indie developers, you'll do a lot more for them if you were to, let's say, buy the game and the plushies that they make, and maybe just support them on Ko-fi, maybe support them through development as opposed to just after the game is already out. There's a lot you can do to support individual creators, but when you're talking about a game that's owned by a publisher, there's kind of nothing you can do. There is a level on which they're going to use the sales of their game as a bargaining chip towards getting more work from the publisher, but it doesn't guarantee anything. It's all negotiations. They get paid to make the game. The publisher is supposed to make its money by selling the game. And so you're really paying the publisher, and the publisher then negotiates more deals with developers. You are such a small part in that to view yourself as I'm buying the game, therefore I'm supporting the devs, is just incorrect. It's just not actually the way things work. You have to go in deeper. And again, this is one of those things where if you really care, you can dedicate yourself to this. You can spend a significant amount of your time and your budgeting on how am I going to support games that I love? How am I going to find a way to be involved enough to understand what I'm doing? What am I contributing? And if you find yourself in a situation where you cannot meaningfully guarantee that your contribution means something, then that needs to be part of your consideration. If a game is being published by Microsoft, there is nothing you can really do to meaningfully support it. Buying it won't help. So at that point, why buy it? What is the point? Now, again, if you just want to own a physical thing and you're buying a physical copy, that's one thing. But you have to look at that as I'm just paying for access to this physical media, not even the game itself. I just want the physical media. You could have the game. You could just download it. And you'd be doing as much moral justice as you would be doing by paying for it. It's just a question of what do you want out of it. And again, this is such a high level of thought to be putting into what you're doing. Most people don't want that. Most people just want to walk into a store, see a thing they want, pay for it, take it home, and have it. And I think that because when you were growing up, you probably did that a bunch of times, it is a natural feeling experience for a lot of people. It feels right. It feels like something that brought them joy in the past, and they want to keep feeling that joy into the future. But the reality is, when you were a kid walking into a store buying a game, you didn't think about the fact that that game only lasts so long. You weren't thinking about how you're going to preserve it. You weren't thinking about what if my house burns down and this game dissolves. You were just see thing, want, get thing, have thing, happy now. But adulthood is more complicated. Adulthood is about longevity. It's not about getting it, it's about keeping it. It's about maintenance. The length of life is a maintenance excursion. It's an endurance test. It's how long can I make this make sense? And so from a business perspective, Sony has just determined that it no longer makes sense for them to keep making physical media. And this makes a lot of people upset, but I don't think that upsetness translates to it making more sense again. Like, Sony made this decision because they're looking at the numbers and they're saying it doesn't make sense for us to keep printing physical carts. And people are thinking, this means that I'm going to have the access to my media much more controlled by somebody else than it already was. But it also was always controlled by more than just you. It was controlled by more than just your desire to own things. It's controlled by, does your house burn down? Does your house flood? It's controlled by, can you afford to house your games? Can you afford to maintenance your games? Do you know how to maintenance your games? Does anyone around you know how to maintenance your games? Do you have a working console still? Do you have the knowledge required to do this thing? And so I understand being upset. I don't understand continuing to buy Sony consoles or giving a flying fuck about what Sony is doing at all. But I just want to offer this little bit of nuance. I'm not really trying to change your mind about anything. Like I said, I'm done with discourse. I don't really care to participate in the competition of ideas. I feel the way I'm saying, and nothing's going to change that. There is no argument you're going to post in the comments that's going to make me go, oh, you're right. Actually, now I'm upset that physical media is being taken away. I would really like to sell all the physical shit I own for the most part. I still, I kind of like owning books. I'm not going to lie. I like the feeling of, reading a manga with my hands. But at the same time, I barely do it anymore. I mostly do things digitally. So I mostly look at my collection as a big waste of space, a big waste of money, and, a rapidly degrading asset that the sooner I can get rid of, the better condition the stuff will be when I get rid of it. I have cats. They tear up my vinyl. They tear up my magazines. It's just, there's way more to this than just I own thing and therefore I have access to thing. So, yeah, that's it. Thanks for listening. And I'll see you in the next one. If you want to find more of what I do, use the links in the description. This is not my first YouTube channel. Not even close.